People of God, hear me now. We are living in a time of shaking, when the foundations are trembling and the ancient altars are rising again. This is no ordinary age. This is the return of Baal. The gods of old have returned, not in name, but in power, in influence, in ideology. And Baal, the ancient false god of Israel's apostasy, the master of seduction, idolatry, and rebellion, is once again enthroned in the culture. We call it progress, but the ancients would have called it worship. And what they worshipped with fear and trembling, we now celebrate in the streets. In the days of ancient Israel, the people who once knew the voice of the living God turned their hearts to foreign gods. They didn't begin by denying God. They began by compromising. First they tolerated the altars, then they accepted them, and then they bowed. And so it is again in our time. The altars of Baal have returned, but they do not look like stone monuments in the wilderness. They are digital, ideological, and deeply embedded in our culture. They are found in places of power and platforms of influence, where truth is traded for relevance, where morality is redefined by feelings, where holiness is mocked and sin is celebrated. There you will find the altars. We think we are modern, progressive, and enlightened, but what the world calls evolution, the prophets would call regression. For this is not the creation of something new. It is the return of something ancient. We have not moved forward. We have gone in a circle. We have come back to the gods of blood and lust, of confusion and pride. Baal was a god of fertility, of sensuality, of self-worship. He promised rain but brought drought. He promised power but left desolation. And now the same spirit walks among us, seducing our generation with the very same lies. We are told that freedom means the removal of boundaries, that love means the celebration of everything, that truth is a matter of opinion. These are not just ideas, they are doctrines. They are preached from secular pulpits, promoted in media, and passed into law. And though we no longer call them by name, they are nothing less than worship. What is an altar? It is a place of sacrifice, and do not be deceived. Sacrifice is still happening. We offer our time, our children, our values, our peace, our souls. We are a generation that sacrifices innocence on the altar of entertainment, purity on the altar of popularity, conviction on the altar of acceptance. And just as in the days of Elijah, the people did not see the danger. They thought they could serve both God and Baal. They thought they could keep one foot in the covenant and one foot in compromise. But you cannot mix light and darkness, righteousness and rebellion. The moment always comes when you must choose. We have built altars to Baal in our heart, altars of pride, greed, sensuality, comfort, control, and the Spirit of the Lord is calling. Tear them down. If the altar is still standing, then something else is still being worshipped. You cannot build the altar of the Lord until the altars of Baal are torn down. This is not a call to the world. This is a call to the people of God. Judgment begins in the house of the Lord. Revival does not begin in the White House. It begins in your house, in your prayer closet, on your knees. It is time to take a holy sledgehammer to every compromise, every secret idol, every false identity that exalts itself above the knowledge of God. It is time to cleanse the temple and restore the fire on the altar, not the fire of culture, but the fire of the Spirit. The altars of Baal have returned, but so has the call of Elijah. The showdown is at hand. And it begins not on Mount Carmel, but in the heart of every believer who dares to stand. Do you hear it? The voice of the Lord calling, "Return to me, and I will return to you." The time of wavering is over. The hour is late. The battle is now. Who will rise? Who will stand? Who will tear down the altars? Let it begin with us. Let it begin with you. From the earliest moments of creation, identity was sacred. It was not a label handed out by society. not a costume we tried on and discarded at will. It was a divine imprint, etched into the soul by the very hand of God. When God formed man from the dust and breathed into him the breath of life, he wasn't just creating a being. He was establishing an identity. And when he fashioned woman from the side of man, he didn't just make a counterpart. He revealed the completion of his image in both male and female. This was not biology alone. This was theology. This was not culture. This was covenant. But as it was then, so it is now. The serpent slithers once more through the garden of this generation, whispering again that ancient deception. Did God really say? That question wasn't just about fruit. It was about identity. It was about authority. It was about truth. And that same question now echoes across classrooms, social platforms, corporate boardrooms, and even pulpits. Did God really say male and female? Did God really say you were created in his image? Did God really say you are fearfully and wonderfully made? And when we doubt what God said, we begin to question who we are. Today's culture is not just experiencing a moral crisis. It is suffering from an identity crisis, and that crisis has become an epidemic. The lines between male and female are no longer just blurred. They are being erased. The design of God is being rewritten by the hands of man. What God has defined, we are told, must be redefined. What was once holy is now labeled hate. What was once truth is now called intolerance. The very core of who we are is being deconstructed, and not by accident. The spirit of Baal, the ancient principality of confusion, rebellion, and sexual distortion, is not dead. It has returned under new names and modern disguises, and it has come for the image bearers. For if the enemy can erase the image, he can stop the mission. He can abort the purpose. He can silence the voice of destiny before it ever awakens. You see, when you don't know who you are, you don't know what to resist. When you don't know your identity, you will accept every lie that comes dressed in validation. And the enemy knows this. That's why identity is not a minor issue. It's the front line of the battle. We now have children who cannot answer the most basic question, who am I? We have teenagers trying to construct identity from internet trends, social media algorithms, and a culture that praises confusion as courage. We have grown adults still lost in the wilderness of performance, of comparison, of never feeling enough. And all the while, Baal laughs, because every soul who forgets their origin forgets their destiny. But let me tell you this, your identity is not up for negotiation. It is not defined by what has happened to you. It is not determined by how you feel. It is not written by culture, by trauma, or by preference. Your identity was authored by the one who spoke galaxies into existence, and that identity is not temporary. It is eternal. You were made in the image of God. That means you were made to carry His glory. You were formed to reflect His goodness. You were designed with purpose, woven together in the secret place of the womb with divine intentionality. Before anyone had a chance to label you, God had already named you. But today, the enemy offers counterfeit identities. He says, be your own God. He says, redefine yourself. He says, choose your own truth. But let me tell you what that leads to: confusion, anxiety, depression, division, chaos. When we depart from the truth of who we are, we also depart from the peace of why we are. This isn't just a social issue, it's a spiritual war. And in a war, you need to know what side you're on. The enemy isn't content to confuse one person. He wants to reshape entire generations. He wants to raise a world that no longer remembers what it means to be made in the image of God. But here's the hope. What God has spoken cannot be undone by man. Though the enemy tries to bury your identity under shame, pain, and lies, God still knows your name, and He is calling His children back. Not to a religion, not to a system, but to their true identity. You are not the sum of your failures. You are not the product of your past. You are not what the world has called you. You are not your trauma. You are not your temptation. You are not your confusion. You are a son. You are a daughter. You are chosen. You are known. You are loved. You are called. You are made in the image of the Most High. And when that revelation hits your spirit, everything changes. The chains fall, the lies break, the confusion lifts, because when you know who you are, the voice of Baal no longer has power over you. This generation doesn't need more slogans. It doesn't need more affirmation of brokenness. It needs truth. It needs the roar of identity restored. It needs the voice of the Father to thunder once again over his children. This is my beloved, in whom I am well pleased. So rise up, beloved. The time for confusion is over. The time for wavering is done. Know who you are, walk in it, fight for it, declare it, and never again surrender it to the altar of Baal. Because you were never created to blend in. You were created to shine. There comes a time in every generation when the gray disappears, when the illusion of neutrality vanishes and the line between light and darkness becomes undeniable. That time has come upon us. The age of compromise is over. The days of lukewarm allegiance and cultural Christianity are being swept away in the tide of confrontation. And as it was in the days of Elijah, so it is now. The people of God must choose whom they will serve. In Elijah's day, Israel had wandered so far from the covenant that they no longer knew who they were. They called themselves the people of Yahweh, yet they bowed before Baal. They had the scriptures, but they followed the culture. They had the altar of the Lord, but it lay in ruins, overgrown with weeds, covered in dust. Meanwhile, the altars of Baal stood tall, honored, and frequented. The king of the land, Ahab, had wed himself to Jezebel, the high priestess of idolatry and the embodiment of spiritual seduction. The prophets were silent. The nation was asleep. But then a voice rose up in the wilderness, not the voice of a crowd, not the voice of a trend, not the voice of compromise, but the voice of a solitary man fully yielded to God. Elijah did not come with public approval. He did not come with political favor. He came with a word from the Lord and a fire in his bones. He stood alone, but he stood anointed. That is the Elijah mandate, to rise in the midst of national apostasy, to speak when others are silent, to stand when others bow. The Elijah mandate is not popular. It is not safe. It is not trendy. It is costly. It requires a backbone of steel and a heart that burns with holiness. It calls for those who fear God more than man, who value truth more than acceptance, who would rather be cast out with the righteous than celebrated with the wicked. Elijah didn't blend in. He didn't water down his message to be more palatable to the prophets of Baal. He didn't change his tone to appease Ahab. He didn't seek common ground with Jezebel. He confronted the sin of his generation with the fire of heaven. He called down drought upon the land, not to destroy the people, but to awaken them, because sometimes God has to dry up the comfort to shake us out of complacency. And when the moment came when the confrontation could no longer be delayed, Elijah stood on Mount Carmel and summoned the people to choose. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him. There was no middle ground. There was no third option. There was no safe neutrality. There was only covenant or compromise, truth or deception, God or Baal. That question still rings out today. The Elijah mandate is not bound to ancient history. It is alive in this very hour. The spirit of Elijah is the spirit of boldness, of clarity, of uncompromised truth. It is rising again in those who will not tolerate mixture in the house of God. It is rising in preachers who will not trade the gospel for applause. It is rising in young people who would rather lose the world than lose their soul. It is rising in parents who will not surrender their children to the education of Babylon. It is rising in the remnant. And yes, Elijah felt alone. He cried out, I am the only one left. But God reminded him, there were still 7,000 who had not bowed, and so it is now. You may feel alone in your workplace, in your school, in your city, in your family. But you are not alone. God always preserves a remnant, and to the remnant he gives the mantle of Elijah. That mantle is not just for preaching. It is for confronting. It is not just for praying. It is for rebuilding. The Elijah mandate tears down the altars of Baal, but it also repairs the altar of the Lord. Elijah rebuilt what had been broken. He didn't just curse the darkness. He lit the fire of revival. The fire didn't fall until the altar was restored. And the fire won't fall now until we do the same. The Elijah mandate is not about political revolution. It's about spiritual restoration. It's not about echoing the world's outrage. It's about embodying heaven's authority. The time is now. We don't need more echoes. We need voices. We don't need more performance. We need presence. The world is not waiting for a new strategy. It is waiting for the sons and daughters of God to rise in the power of Elijah, to walk in the spirit of truth, and to declare with authority, the Lord, He is God. This is your hour. This is your call. The mantle is falling. Will you pick it up? Will you stand when others fall? Will you speak when others are silent? Will you rebuild what others have forsaken? Because this world does not need another celebrity. It does not need another trend. It does not need another influencer. It needs a voice like Elijah's, crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, turn back to God, let the fire fall again. It is time to rise, not in fear, but in fire, not in compromise, but in courage, not in silence, but in thunder. For the God who answered by fire is still the same, and He is looking for a generation that will carry the flame. Let it be you, let it be now, let the Elijahs rise. The reign of Baal is not the final word, because the fire still falls, the Spirit still moves, and the remnant still rises. You were born for such a time as this. Not to retreat, not to conform, but to ignite revival. So rise, Elijahs, rise, remnant, the hour is late, the battle is fierce, but the victory belongs to the Lord. Tear down the altars, rebuild the temple. And let the fire fall again.